Good afternoon. I would like to call to order the Cabarrus County Board of Commissioners for our budget workshop on May the 27th, 2014. And yes, Ann, are you, Mike or Ann? Who's going to? Ann's going to start it off, okay. I'm just going to turn it over to you. Oh, I'm sorry, real quick, if you have a cellular phone, if you'll put it on vibrator silent, that we would appreciate that too. So there you go.
Start.
Yeah. All right. Is this on? Okay, now it is. Thank you, Commissioner Poole, and welcome to the first of, I guess, two budget workshops. We'll be reconvening at the work session next Monday for the other part of it. So welcome. Thank you for joining us. First, before we get started, I did want to point out a couple things at your where you're sitting. The first thing on top were some budget updates. There were some pages from the budget book that needed to be updated as far as some numbers, figures, and explanations. So those are some pages to be put into your budget book. They're printed on both sides, so that way you have continuity in reading, so that way you don't have to have several pages that are not two-sided. The other thing below that are the budget line items. This was requested, I think, last week. And then the third item is the KCS budget request. They wanted you to have a hard copy, so we've provided that for you as well. So I wanted to go over the agenda for today. First, what's going to happen is just, again, giving you the lineup of who all is going to present over the next few sessions. Then Mr. Mike Downs is going to go over the budget message. Then Ms. Ann Wilson is going to go through the budget summary. I'll continue with the personnel and program funding matrix, and then Ms. Ann Wilson will finish us off with the education outside agencies section, and Mr. Jonathan Marshall will be covering the CIP before the 5-year plan. But first, today, we're going to be discussing Kannapolis City Schools, well, the budget process, and then Kannapolis City Schools, Cabarrus County Schools, and then there was a couple agenda items from May 19th that we're going to be discussing as well. And then there will be general discussion, and then we'll recess to May 29th. On Thursday, we'll have RCCC and the other outside agencies, and that is the EDC, CHA, CVB, Arts Council, and fire districts. We'll have general discussion after that. And then we'll go on to June 2nd work session, where we'll discuss the county departments. All the county department heads will be here for you to ask any questions. And also we'll have any other general discussion, and we'll be adjourning at that time. So any questions with the agenda? Okay. With that, I'm going to pass it on to Mr. Mike Downs. I do want to say that on top of every single page, you'll see budget book page number, so that way you can follow along with us as we discuss the entire presentation. That'll allow you to get any additional detail than what we talk about here today.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Just to follow up on that. The departments that we're planning to be here, actually, all of the department heads will be here on June the 2nd. However, the only ones that we plan to make presentations right now are the sheriff and human services, and along with human services, transportation. So if in your reading there's something there that you prefer a specific department head to make a presentation, just let me know and we'll make that happen. If not, they'll be here in the audience and we can pull them up for questions. So, but those, the sheriff and the human services are our largest departments, and so those are typically, historically, that's who we have come in and talk. So again, just getting started. It's very informal. Starting off with the general fund budget that is recommended at this time is $209,684,590, and that's requires a 70-cent property tax rate to fund at that level. Just some of the other highlights based on our budget process from the staffing level. We have decreased the general fund spending our current general fund spending by 1.77%. We've been able to fund or proposed funding, that's totally up to at your discretion, some additional school funding for the teachers, some of that of which you have already approved. Some of that is what the governor is proposing, and then we in turn would typically match whatever that is on the local level. The annualized salary, and you'll hear some of this a little bit as we get farther down, the two different types of teachers' pay is the one that you have already approved, and what that is the annualized amount that is in your budget, and we were able to fund it. The governor's proposed salaries are very similar to what we did this year. We put that in your contingency, so should it be approved at the state level, you have it at your discretion. If it's not approved, then it's not, then it remains in your contingency. Okay. So as we were going through, we were looking at several things through the process. Again, how can we look at all of our programs and see, are they still relevant? Are they still making any difference? Are they still cost effective? And if not, why? And what can we do to change things? But some of the other things we were looking at too is what's going on around us in the county, in the cities, in the region, in the state, and on the national level. And so we started looking at some things, and then how are we looking to address those? And the other things too, and Ann will talk a little bit about it as we go further, is that we've had several conversations about, at the end of the year, revenues over expenses, and how do we continue to narrow those gaps. So you're going to see and hear some of the things that we've started talking about, and both from an operational level, but then also from a revenue projection level, and we're going to talk to that a little bit. But some of the things we were looking at, the economy is improving. It's improving here at a different rate than it may be in the eastern part of the state and in other parts of the country. But so what are we doing as far as an improving economy means? Hopefully more revenues are coming in. Hopefully we can feel a little more comfortable as we project revenues, just simply because we know that the economy is improving. So so as we were looking at improving economy as a condition that's out there, we have moved in the direction of trying to be a little more aggressive than we have in the past on our sales tax projections and our property tax projections. With that improving economy, we've got more growth coming in. With that growth, we've got a lot of houses being built, so it's putting a little more pressure on our inspections department. So we've got in here a couple of new positions. One would be, as we get a little further, one is a permit clerk or an administrative clerical type position, and the other is a plan reviewer. We are stacked to the hilt in our plan review room, which is good.
When you had talked about the growth that we were having, I did notice on the handout that you have ad valorem taxes for 2014, both adopted and revised, is only $174,000 different from our 2015 proposed number. Right. And with the growth that we've had, that doesn't seem, so I was curious about that.
We will talk a little bit as we get along and why it's where it is. So good. I'm gonna write that down so I don't forget to make sure we address it. Growth, property tax. Okay. The second position that you'll see, we'll talk more about, is a plan reviewer. Commercial plans all have to be reviewed in-house, and whether it's a small remodel job or a very large new building, a 400,000 square foot building or something. So we're a little, our waiting times are weeks, not days in that. So we've pulled an inspector or two out of the field to help with that. But when you pull them out of the field, then we get a little bit behind in the field. So we're proposing a second one with revenues to additional revenues to pay for those. So again, the governor's proposal as a condition to increase salaries. Again, as I just said, we're proposing that the money is in your budget. However, it's in a contingency should you need it. It's not in there in a line item right now, but it's available for you to move if needed. And again, we are starting to experience some competition from other counties that are starting to recruit in sort of, especially with our building inspectors, all of our inspectors. All the other counties are they're experiencing some of the growth we are, so they're having to, they had sort of compressed like we did in our staff there. Now they're out vying for the same applicants that we have, and sometimes it's cheaper to go after one that's already working and already have their certificates. So we're seeing some of that competition there. So we're just keeping our eye on the salaries, the market rates and positions, and make sure that you have that, and that's what the salary study is doing, to make sure you have that in front of you so that you can make decisions on that. You approved several months ago an expansion of service in the Midland community, so the new library is in the budget. Based on their construction schedules or their design and construction schedules, they don't foresee opening up before the fourth quarter, so we do have 1 quarter of funding in here in the proposed budget. Same thing with the EMS station in the Western-Cabarrus. It's actually located off Weddington Road in the Concord Mills Speedway area, and that's to address peak hour response. Traffic during the day, during the daytime hours, it's getting worse and worse, so that helps address our response times. And that too, that will begin, let's see, make sure that's in the fourth quarter as well, where Concord's going to be constructing that. We'll be co-locating with Concord Fire. Resume the annualized, we had previously discussed the other day and approved, resume the annualized funding of workman's compensation versus having a contingency over in the fund balance and assigning that and restricting that or holding that just in case. We are proposing to move that back into the payroll, or excuse me, into the, let me make sure I'm on here, through the normal payroll process and funding it through the general fund. Again, funds to support the annualized teacher salaries, and in order to absorb the salaries that were approved several months ago, when we annualized them, they were in the area of $2 million. So the cuts that we made operationally were able to support that and others so that we can keep the tax rate at the current rate without any negative towards any of the programs and services. The other thing that we have discussed with the schools is the problem with deferred maintenance on their buildings over the last several years, which has created a large need and a very expensive need. Something that can't be done overnight, just way too expensive, but we have provided in this budget some additional funding that you will see as we start talking numbers a little bit further down. Again, we are on the next page there. We are 70-cent tax rate proposed. You can see there has been a projected increase in our valuation for next year. The penny would increase based on the proposed budget from adopted 214 to proposed 15. The per penny amount would increase 45,277. It's about a 2.46% increase. And again, the general fund is 209,684,590, which is 3,776,422 decrease from last year's operating budget. So with that, we'll move on, and we'll start the summary of the actual budget that's been prepared. And Ann and Parth and Pam and Jonathan and myself will be at your disposal here. So I'm going to pass it on to you, Ann, and you can keep the ball moving forward. So.
Okay, thank you. This first slide shows the all-fund summary. We appropriate funds for 5 different annual funds. The general fund, which was mentioned at the 209, which is a 1.77% decrease. The landfill fund at $919,400, which is a decrease of $6,600 from last year. The 911 emergency telephone system, which is proposed exactly as last year at 755, 724. The arena and event center, which includes the arena and the fair, is proposed at $1,594,551, 551, which is a $78,721 increase over last year. That increase is a combination of budgeting the incentives as part of the budget process instead of coming back later and doing an amendment for that, and a reduction in the contribution from the general fund to the arena fund. That was reduced by $56,000 this year. The health insurance is proposed at $9,337,153, which is a reduction of $48,076 from last year. That is a net reduction in estimated claim cost. Here's a slide which shows how each fund shows in size, and obviously the general fund is the lion's share at 94.33% of the budget, and the other pieces are important, but they are small comparatively. So from here on out, I'll be talking about the general fund. Does anyone have any questions about any of the other funds? Okay. All right, now let's look at the general fund. This is in your budget book on page 79. And we're going to look at revenue by source, where it comes from. And by far and large, the largest item is ad valorem taxes. And we have budgeted $133,866,989, which is about $175,000 more than last year. Now, that's the whole category of ad valorem taxes, not just the current year. So what we've got is, when Mr. Wiesner did his projection, he projected an increase of about 2.9%, which was $3.1 million. Okay? And that was just the ad valorem tax line. However, in fiscal 14, we had 16 months budgeted of the DMV revenue. For the tax and tag together, we had the one-time money and had 4 extra months. So that was $2.467 million that was in 14, and of course will not be in 15. And also, the delinquent taxes are being reduced by $540,000 between property and DMV. With the tax and tag together, it's pretty much it's severely reducing the delinquent taxes on vehicles because they have to pay their tax to get their tag, and so the delinquents are estimated to go down. So that's why the net number is 174. The gross number is $3,000,001, but these other things, the big one time of the 2.4, almost 2.5, and then the reduction in the expected in delinquents is creating the net of only 175. The next category is other taxes. The lion's share of that is sales taxes. And we are projecting an increase of 3%, which is, for just sales taxes, $1,066,000. Now remember, this sales tax is the one that's very hard to estimate. And it's hard to get a trend in how we relate and what happens in the state. And it's really hard to project the refunds that are coming. If you'll recall, in November, we got hit with $7.6 million in refunds. And so this year, and they're also 2 months behind. So as I won't know how this year turned out until August. And right now it looks like we're going to be about $165,000 below our current budget. But we, like you said, we've been brave and budgeting, assuming 3%. And that was the lower end of what the state recommended. The state came in and said 3 to 5, and so hopefully 3 will be a good number with that. And I will keep you apprised of what's happening with those refunds. The other tax category is another 18% of our general fund revenues. I failed to say that the property tax is 63.84% of our revenues. The third category is intergovernmental revenues, which we're budgeting at about $19.8 million. And overall in that category, it's $360,000 more than last year's adopted. And in most of these categories, we have some things going up and some things going down. In that category, about $15.9 million is for human services activities. But there's other things in there as well, such as the 2011A subsidy, of $712,000. There's transportation grants of $719,000 in there. There's JCPC funding of $295,000. There's child enforcement revenues of $211,000. Child enforcement revenues of $211,000. Court facility fees of $310,000. A state library grant of $175,000. This year, we've got the whole year of the school resource officers at $498,000. And we budgeted the Medicaid hold harmless funding of $450,000. In prior years, we had not budgeted that. We didn't get a lot of information where we felt comfortable with how much we were getting. But this year, they sent us something that said that an amount that we should be comfortable getting, so we have budgeted that. Though some state funding has decreased due to state funding cuts in the federal sequestration, the overall increase was $360,000, and the biggest piece of that is the additional funding for the SROs, which was $234,000, and the $450,000 for the Medicaid hold harmless. So those were some of the ups that made that ultimate line go up 1.88%. The next category is permits and fees, and that's basically your building inspectors and your register of deeds. Now, in fiscal 14, we increased those revenues 39%, and this year we're adding another 4.69% to them, which equates to about $190,000. So it does bode well that the economy is turning around. The next category is sales and services, which we're budgeting right around $11 million. That's $185,000 less than last year. And that one comes from a wide variety of sources. It can be fees from various departments for goods and services rendered by them to the public or other governmental departments or other governments. Examples are your EMS transport fees, recreation program fees, and Medicaid case management. These revenues decreased $185,000 overall. There again, we have some things going up and some things going down. Some things that went up were jail fees. They increased $81,000. Deputy reimbursements went up $171,000, and ambulance fees were budgeting up $60,000. Some of the areas that are declining are elections. That was $95,000. The Medicaid case management of $31,000, the CAP, the Community Alternatives Program revenues of $168,000, and some ITS revenues of $136,000 that related to one-time Acela projects in fiscal 14, and that's why there were a reduction when they aren't there in 15. Any other questions on sales and services? Investment earnings, with the rates as low as they are, it's a sad story when you are investing, but it's a good story if you have to borrow money. So that one cuts both ways, but we anticipate basically flat, only an increase of $3,000. The next category is miscellaneous, and that includes donations and grants from non-governmental entities, things like proceeds from sale of fixed assets, things like that. And a few of the things that we know will happen are budgeted, but most of that we budget both sides of grants and donations as they come during the year. The last category is other financing sources, and that's where we took a big hit from 7.8 to 2.4 million, dropped about 5.4 million, and that one's pretty cut and dry. We reduced the lottery funding by 2.7 million, and then the COPS funding of 2.7 million. So between those two, there's your 5.4. So overall, that shows you where the 3.7 decline is coming from what we adopted last year. The next slide is showing you in a picture. The lion's share of where we get our money is the ad valorem taxes. That's that pretty blue or purple. The red is other taxes at 18.1%, and the intergovernmental revenues are at 9.49%. Any questions on revenues? Okay. I think we got one more slide on revenues, which is showing it by function. Yes. And here's where it's showing the lion's share is coming from the general government, which is your ad valorem and sales taxes. That's 76.69%. The next one is the human services group at 9.14%. The third is the educational at 7.85%. And then fourth is public safety, which is the orange at 5.16%. Budget accuracy. I wanted to give you some data about how we've done on our budgeting. On this chart from 09 to 14, it's showing that our revised budget's in blue, going up and down. The actual revenues are shown in red, and the actual expenses are shown in orange. And basically, over this period of time, on average, we are budgeting 99.9% of our revenues. So we're budgeting 0.1% less than what actually, the budget is less than what actually is happening. We're 99, we budgeted 99%, we'd like to be over 100, so that we're a little above where we budgeted.
When that says revised budget there for the blue line, that includes all revisions during the year?
Yes.
What would it look like if we took our actual budget for
At
the
the beginning
adoption?
of the year.
The adopted budget compared to the actual revenues, do you know?
Well, that, for instance, this year, at the original budget, we didn't budget that transfer to the capital reserve, and then when you made that $30 million move, it's going to show a pretty big difference. It would depend each year on how much happened during the year. Some things affect the budget tremendously, such as a big transfer like that or a refunding. Those are huge amounts. In fact, throughout the budget, you'll notice that I highlighted the amounts on the refundings and told you how much, because when you're looking year to year, you're going, what's going on with that? So it would, obviously, the difference would be larger based on some of those large things that happened during the year.
Yeah. I guess my only point is doing it this way. If you spend the money during the year, because for instance, I think in January we knew that we were going to have at least a $3.5 million surplus, and then I think by March it was up to $5.5 million. If we had started spending that, that would make it look like our budget was much more accurate than it really was if we had started spending that through the year, wouldn't it?
Well, in order to spend it, you have to budget it, so they do go in tandem. But then there again, the budget revisions are the planned changes. Usually, we do not change the budget we do for sales taxes or for property taxes. Usually, we do not change those. Usually, we don't make changes for personnel during the year of any great significance, unless something like the school resource officer or something big comes in. But for just small things during the year, we don't make those changes. And on the expense side, we're not as close. We are at 95.81%. So when we budget something, we're coming in at 95.81% of what we budgeted. So that leaves 4.19% on average where we have, in essence, over budgeted, underspent. And we're working to try to get that down to where we are closer on those numbers.
I got a question for you. A couple slides back, on page 17, you mentioned in the intergovernmental revenues category the Medicaid hold harmless. Or what is that exactly?
That is where we had some sales tax that we gave up. And the state said, I will hold you harmless on that sales tax so that you won't lose from what you would have got under the other funding category. And that's why it's so hard for us to estimate on our end.
It was part of the Medicaid hold harmless swap. When we gave up Medicaid, the state took the sales tax from us, and it comes back and calculates that you would not have spent more. The county doesn't lose anything in that swap. So if sales tax came in greater than Medicaid, we get a check.
Right.
If Medicaid comes in greater than sales tax, we win because we don't have to pay anything back to the state.
Okay.
So that's where that comes from.
Okay. And then also I wanted to ask you about you said the other financing, which was the decrease of 11%. You mentioned the lottery funds and the COPS funding. Can you explain that?
Okay, the lottery funding, we had built up some funds for that and had it planned as to what we were spending each year, and what was planned for 14 was 4.9 million, and for this year it's 2.2 million, and here on out, we just budgeted 2 million after that, because, and there again, the legislature makes some changes sometimes in what they do with that funding. So that's the 2.7. The other is the COPS funding, which is funding we got from the debt proceeds, and that's gone now. We've used it up.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Ready to talk expenses? That starts on page 79. And in this slide, we're showing where we've broken expenses down into 3 categories of personnel, operations, and capital outlay. The personnel increased $253,000 or 0.42%, and Mr. Mehta is going to give you some detail on what's going on the personnel. The fiscal 15 budget, however, includes no COLA or merits. We did have the local government retirement system tell us that we had to increase the local government contribution for the LEOs from 7.28 to 7.41%. The next item is the operational changes, and for this slide, I want you to understand that operations includes all of the schools, even the capital part for the schools. So that one was a reduction of $2,061,000. And there again, we got some ups and we got some downs. So some of the areas that went up were where we annualized the 1% raise that you gave the school teachers on effective March 1st. Well, when you put it in for the whole year, it's $2,096,000. Also, this budget has $600,000 in additional building maintenance for the schools. We had a $300,000 increase in workers' comp expense and a $279,000 increase in economic incentives, those that had previously been awarded. That's the estimate of what will be this year. So those were some of the larger ups. Some of the larger decreases. Minor technology decreased $129,000. The power budget decreased $350,000. The building maintenance budget decreased $204,000. The salary adjustments decreased $335,000. There were some contingencies related to fuel, legal, and insurance settlements. That totaled $230,000 that were decreased. The jail decreased $416,000. That's primarily the food, their minor technology. The ICE program was $256,000 that was reduced. The contingency reduction was $557,000 from where we started last year. The courts decreased $120,000. That's primarily in building maintenance for them. Human services decreased $1,258,000. The larger categories there were child welfare, transportation, and economic services. The debt payments decreased $1,048,000. The contribution to the Cabarrus Health Alliance decreased $243,000. If you'll recall, last year we gave them $300,000 in one-time funding, and so that is a net of the decrease of $300,000. And then this budget proposes $56,000 for a school nurse supervisor. So the $243,000 is the net of that. The contributions to other funds declined $535,000, and that's primarily reductions in funding to the capital projects fund. So those are the big downs, and the net of those ups and downs is the $2,061,000. Capital.
And can I ask you a question on that slide? Oh, you know what? I'm sorry.
Okay. The capital outlay declined $1,967,000. Well, 1.5 of that was the land for the new elementary school that was budgeted in fiscal 14. And then the $467,000 are reductions in the county capital outlay. What is there is $687,000 for motor vehicles, $170,000 for furniture and equipment, $100,000 in other improvements, $278,000 in matching grants, and $110,000 for technology. Okay, so that area declined 59%. So
On your operations line, out of that $2,061,000, how much of that is unreimbursed expense? And you don't have to answer me now, but would you get that for me?
unreimbursed expense.
I think a lot of the things that you mentioned, like the ICE program and things like that, we get a grant for, and that grant simply went away, and so,
We would do both sides of it.
yeah,
Okay, so you're interested in the net county cost?
yeah. And
Okay.
I don't expect for you to have that now.
I think it will be most everything with the exception of human services. There would have been some on the other side. And the ICE, I think those are the larger ones, but I'll see what I can find on the human service side. The next this is just showing the chart of the percentage of our budget that's personnel, which is 29.09%. The percentage that's operations, which is 70%. And just rule of thumb, 63% of the items in the red, the operation, relates to schools. They're 44% overall and 63% of the operations budget. And then that little sliver of capital outlay. Now, here's where we break down the general fund expenditures by function. And of course, you see where the largest section is education at 44.07%. That does not include what's in contingency for them. That's just what's in the line items for them. The second largest area is your human services at 18.77%. That's your gray area. And then public safety, which is your orange area, at 15.69%. Those top three make up 78.53% of the budget. And then everything else is 21.47%. Okay. Any other questions before we turn it over and talk about personnel? Okay, Bart.
Okay. This is just short and sweet. You have, these are all the new positions that have been proposed as part of the fiscal year 15 budget. The number on the left-hand side are the number of positions or bodies. The number on the right-hand side in the parentheses are FTEs, so that's reflective of the number of hours they would work or reflective of when they may be hired. So for instance, communication specialists, they're going to be hired in July, or there's already someone there, but they're only going to be working, 70% of the 40-hour work week. Whereas the revaluation office assistant and revaluation data collectors will actually be hired in September. So that's what the distinction is between some of those numbers. You can see that a lot of these positions are based on the conditions that were shared with you in the budget message a few minutes back. This is the page in the budget book that you've seen. This is from pages 103 to 105. So these are all the new positions. You can see that there were several positions that were not proposed, but we did want to show you that the need and the demand for some of these positions are there, but what made most sense for the fiscal year 15 budget is what's proposed. There are some other position changes that aren't necessarily new positions. We had one reclassification that's for a resource conservation coordinator. There's no FTE change, the person's already there. There was a deleted position that's for the LSTA senior library assistant. That was a grant funded position. That grant is no longer going to be there in fiscal year 15. For that reason, the position went away, and that was something that was made clear from the beginning. And then there's change in hours. So when Midland Library does open, the mail clerk courier will have to travel there, and so that increases there. And then 2 library assistant, their hours are going to change at Kannapolis Library. And so net, when you look at it all together, going from revised 14 to proposed 15, you have 14 new positions. FTE change is 7.23, and that is 1.3% or 0.73% respectively. So that's what we have for positions. Are there any questions?
Just real quick, the number of positions is 14, however, the full-time, FTE is full-time equivalent, and that's why it's low. Some of those are just additional hours, part-time employees and that type of thing. That's why the position is 14 and the FTE equivalent it's a different number. A lot of times that matches, but a lot of these are part-time or just additional hours on existing part-time.
The biggest reason for that difference this year is due to the Midland positions and the EMS co-station positions opening only in the fourth quarter. So you have a chunk of positions that aren't funded for the full year because they're only going to be starting in April.
What happened with this senior library assistant? You said the job was a grant program?
Yes, sir. That was a grant program that
So that job was done away with?
That will be beginning fiscal
How
year
about
15.
the person in that position?
That would also go away. Unless there's been some turnover in the year and they've been able to maybe move that person into that position, but that would be a question for Ms. Yuri, and she might be able to answer it better next week, or we can have the answer for you by Thursday.
Okay.
Yeah.
How about the 2 landfill operators?
So those are 2 positions that currently we outsource with a staffing firm. But as we analyze that, because as we proposed to you and you've okayed, we are expanding the construction and demolition section. So we know for a number of years that we'll be able to keep that area open, and so it doesn't make sense to keep outsourcing that. So those will become county employees. There is some net cost difference, but overall, from a legal and employment position, it makes sense, and from a functional position, to retain them and keep their experience, to move them in as permanent county employees.
Okay. So how does that go along with the partnership that we had, I guess, approved, what was that, a year or 2 ago with Mr. Gilkerson?
It's not this.
not
It's different sections. So
Okay.
he has his own employees. These
Right.
are employees that we use in the construction and demolition.
Okay, that's good. And then what about the communications specialist? What is that?
It's currently an auxiliary position that has 19 hours, 19 hours per week, and the use of information that's being sent out to the public, a request was made to increase the hours, and once you increase the hours, it can no longer be an auxiliary employee. That would turn into a part-time employee. So it's just switching the person from an auxiliary employee to a part-time employee with increased hours.
Okay.
Does the county furnish insurance to part-time employees?
If you work 28 hours on average per year. So we currently have 3? Per week, excuse me. No, we have 3 outside of EMS, and I think there's like 5 in EMS. So there might be, there's less than 10 employees in that category.
Okay. Any additional questions? All right. So we'll move on to the program funding matrix. We've seen this before, but just as a recap, the program funding matrix, much like the bar graphs, the charts, it shows the budget in a slightly different way. It breaks it up into different categories: mandated service, mandated dollars, discretionary service, discretionary dollars, even some contractual dollars. So it separates it in that way, and there are several combinations of funding that you can have with that. So the first one is this green section that's mandated service and mandated dollars, and that actually includes debt service. And so the FY15 proposed is 0.1343, and that's an increase of 0.0022 cents per $100 on the tax rate, and that's largely a decrease in the education lottery money. So as Commissioner Meismer had asked earlier, because that lottery money is not coming in as much this year, that's where that decrease in education lottery money increases the tax rate. On the blue section, you have mandated service and discretionary dollars, so we have to provide the service, but the number of dollars that we put to it are discretionary. And there we've actually decreased, the proposed is 0.4306, and the tax rate change is negative 0.0181. That 4% decrease is mainly due to one-time capital for education, but there are some other categories that had some decreases, and that's the Sheriff Administration and Operations, Child Welfare, daycare, foster care, jail, and the Cabarrus Health Alliance. The pink section, where it's discretionary service and contractual dollars, that means that we choose to do the service, but if we do the service, then we are contractually obligated to provide the funding. And so there we have mainly, that's also an increase, and that's mainly due to the economic development incentive grants. So that's a good example of we don't have to do it, but when we do, we are contractually obligated to provide that money. The next section, core administrative services, that's going to be departments like human resources, county manager, finance. These are all departments that support all the different county departments. And there you also see a decrease of nearly 9%, going from 0.0691 cents to $100 to from going from 0.0759 to 0.0691, and that's mainly due to a decrease in general services and information technology services. And finally, the yellow section is discretionary service and discretionary dollars. This is where you have the most discretion to change the service level or the dollars. And there, this section also had the most movement out of all the sections, but it is a section that doesn't have as many dollars to it. But what's happening there is the non-departmental contingency, which is the board contingency, and the contribution to capital projects is what significantly decreased from fiscal year 14.
And Parth, didn't that also be affected by the addition of the discretionary service contractual contracts by extracting that out of the yellow area?
Yes.
Hey, Parth, every time we get into budget discussions, somebody will come in and say, there's $18 million that we have discretionary funding, and if you want to cut anything out of it, it's got to be cut out of the $18 million. And this is the matrix that I always point people to. Really, out of our budget, 13 cents out of the 70 is mandatory, and we have no discretion there. But everything else, if you found an efficiency within that category, you could reduce funding to represent that efficiency. Isn't that right?
I can't speak to that. I mean, that's really, at the end of the day, that's how this entire process works.
But isn't that what this chart shows, that there's 13 cents out of the 70, less than 25% that you mandated service and mandated dollars. You cannot reduce a dollar there because it's a mandated service and a mandated minimum of money.
Sure.
But everything else, even mandated service and discretionary dollars, if you found an efficiency in that category, you could reduce that service funding to reflect that efficiency. That would be a category that you could reduce if you wanted to, correct?
Assuming you found an efficiency, yes.
Yeah.
Because they all have discretionary dollars attached.
So just going forward, over 75% of our budget has discretionary elements to it.
Yes, with the exception, yes, discretionary elements, yes.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions on the program funding matrix? Okay. So I'll hand the presentation back off to Ann, or Ms. Wilson, and she'll take you through the education section and the outside agency section.
Okay, we'll start with Cabarrus County Schools. It's in your budget book on pages 251 to 257. I've tried to summarize some facts here. The proposed amount for current expense is $39,329,535, which represents a dollar change of $1,843,293, which is basically their share of the $2,096,000 that related to the 1% teacher increase. Now, in the Cabarrus County Schools, there was $8,000 on that increase that related to technology that you'll see down there below. Kannapolis did not have any positions that they applied that 1% to, but the $1,843,000 and the $8,000 is their share of that increase for the 1%. Their share of the $600,000 for building maintenance is the $530,000 that you see under the building maintenance category, which brings their building maintenance to about $6.5 million. Then their grounds maintenance is the same at $1,299,000. Their technology funding is roughly the same with the addition of that $8,000 of $3,745,000. The next item is discussing the nurses. That's a base amount that was determined in fiscal 12 in terms of determining the allocation methodology of the $793. However, I wanted to make you aware that the total amount of the funding for the school nurses for both LEAs is $2,074,000. but a piece of it is here to balance it up, if you will, for the allocation percentages. So that brings their capital, their current expense total to $51,667,901, which is an increase of $2,381,610, or 4.83%. Then the capital is the $1,020,000 that is kind of the norm, if you will, for them, which is the reduction of the $1.5 million, which was the land purchase that was included in the fiscal 14 budget for the elementary school. Let's see. Anything else? Next is Kannapolis City Schools. Their share for the 1% was $244,727, which was added to their current expense line, bringing them to $5,381,292. Their share of the building maintenance was $70,104, bringing their building maintenance to $949,423. Their grounds maintenance held the same at $238,864. Their technology at $155,627. Their split of the nurses was $136,585 back in 12. Of course, they're getting their share of the $2 million. For a total of $6,861,791, an increase of $314,831. And their capital budget remains unchanged at $100,000. So this is a summary slide. You'll find it in your books on page 256. Of the current expense for both schools is $57,599,474, which is an increase of $2,696,441, or 4.91%. The capital is $1,120,000, which is a decrease of the $1,005,000 related to the land. The debt service related to the schools declined by $786,158. That's not making any changes. That's just as our amortization schedule goes down. There's less payments per year, and that's $31,272,053. There's $84,000 in there that is for technology related to the schools that the county uses. And then the school nurses of $2,074,877, which, as I said earlier, is an increase in the school nurses of $56,898 for a school nurse supervisor to fund that. Now, that brings the total to $92,150,404, and that's basically 44.01% of the budget. What's not here reflected is what's in the contingency for them, which is another $315,326, depending on how the governor's budget plays out. So when that's added to it, their total is $92,465,730, which is 44.1% of the budget.
Hey, I got a question. Since the school nurses now are they're employees of the Health Alliance?
Yes, ma'am.
So why do they show up under school summary? And is that used in any way to count the per pupil amount that the schools are funded?
The initial amounts that Ann showed you under Cabarrus County Schools and Kannapolis City Schools, that's the amount of money that they gave to the school nursing program before we got involved and started giving additional money. We tried to take those amounts out, and it messed up the ADM calculation per school district, so we had to leave it in. We tried to put the whole money for the school nurses in, and that messed the ADM up. So what we've done is, at this point, left the initial foundation of what the schools were giving in the ADM calculation, and the additional money that the county is giving is not part of the ADM calculation.
Okay. Outside of here, I'd like to see how those numbers flushed out. I'm just kind of curious on how that worked. I know that I knew it made a difference. I'm curious what the impact was. And I'm not questioning the decision. There was a different angle I was looking at for it, but I just like to see how that math worked out, so I can understand it better. And then, let's see, are you getting ready to talk about their attendance numbers? The projected number of students?
Oh, yes. I
Okay, I'll wait. I had a question on that,
Well,
just to make sure. So,
if you'll
Well, there
back
you
up to
go.
Cabarrus.
You have it up there.
They're projected at $30,463 for Cabarrus County and $4,146 for Kannapolis City Schools.
And in here, let's see, I have on 251, that this shows a net decline of 0.57% of students. Is that right?
It is
For the
from-
two, and then.
It is when you compare ADM to ADM every April, the calculation that the state gives. At a conference I went to within the last month, found out that the charter school students are being subtracted from the county's student numbers, and they do that a year in arrears, and that information has never been disclosed to us on the local level. So we are trying to come back and do a calculation to show what the real increase of students are versus the number of students that are leaving and going to the charter schools, because the county school systems have to pay the charter schools the local portion. The state of North Carolina, when they did their calculations, they took care of themselves. And when the charter school kids move over, they just set up another school district, and they fund it that way. Well, it's messing us up in understanding, because it looks like our student population goes down, therefore our ADM calculation goes up, and we have to give more money to the charter schools than they have. So we're trying to come back to a reconciliation to figure out how we're going to at least be able to share this information with both boards, and then where we go from there, because they had a significant population change this year for charter school students.
So that number of 4146 does not include the charter school students that are in
were
that district.
enrolled last school year. If they just went this school year, they'd still be in that number, and then they'll fall out next year.
Okay, and that's what I was trying to get at, is we fund for every Cabarrus County student, whether they are in Kannapolis City Schools, Cabarrus County Schools, or a charter school. And so that's what I was trying to figure out, where the numbers were coming from, and if it includes charter school students in there, or it doesn't include them in there, and how does that impact ADM? It was back to my reasoning on the school nurses. How does that impact? So was that inflating the ADM amount because they were in there? Is it lowering the amount? That's what I was trying to get a handle on. So
It kind of lowers the amount of the money that we give to the Health Alliance that we didn't give directly to the schools, but then the charter school kids are decreasing the number of the students, so that inflates the ADM number. So we've got to figure out how to get those school districts that are charter schools to tell us how many kids were Cabarrus County schools and how many were Kannapolis City schools, to reconcile this whole mess in order to understand what we really are supposed to be doing, because it's not making sense.
Well, and like I said, they took care of themselves. It's kind of it doesn't make any sense at all how that process works of having to, we try to figure out the best we can on how to fund these two school systems, and then every month they're chasing how many have left or how many are coming back, because it's going back and forth. And then to really make it difficult would be the legislation that anybody can go to any school district that they want to. And my argument on that, against that particular one, is if I lived in Mecklenburg, let's just, we talk about how great Cabarrus County is. If I live in Mecklenburg County, I like my house. I don't want to sell my house. Highland Creek, part of it's in Cabarrus, part of it's in Mecklenburg. So I'm going to say, I just want to go to Cabarrus. Well, they're not paying taxes here, so we're not getting any money for them. And I can guarantee you, without even asking, Mecklenburg County's not going to send us a check. So now all of a sudden you've got students coming, and we don't have any revenue, any revenue that goes with them because of them paying taxes here. And I just think that's just a bigger issue that's going to make it even harder to be able to figure out.
And from
when
our
something is, would you say 63% of operations, and I
Yeah.
forgot the number, 40 whatever percent of our total budget.
But from our
Makes it very
perspective, when
difficult.
we're funding school students, we need to know how many charter school students we're funding, and we don't know anymore because they're being subtracted out. So we've got to, Kelly and I've had some conversations about it, but we've got to figure out somehow to come back to a methodology that makes sense to what we're funding, because this significant change is what brought this out.
Well, and you don't want to plan that there's 100, I'm picking a number, 1,000 students are going to charter schools and fund them for 1,000 students, and then they find out 1,500 students are going, and they're paying out for 1,500 students, but they're only receiving money for 1,000, that's obviously hurting their budget, and we're not going back in and saying, okay, well, you know, we didn't get help on the numbers, so we're going to give you more, because we don't have money just sitting around to do that either. So that was another thing. And somewhere in here, and I don't know where it would go, but I would like added, and I know I've asked it for numerous times, but it'd be better for me if it's in the notebook, locally paid positions and the types for each of the LEAs. Because what most people believe, or what should happen, is the state says we'll pay for all the teachers, and the state doesn't. And I think that's data that we should have readily available that says, well, and I know you've got it because you've given it to me before, but I think that should be part of this information somewhere, that those positions are being paid with local dollars. And that's where the contingency you talked about with the governor's budget, you've got to hold that out, because it's not fair that this group gets the governor's raise and this group doesn't. And the reason they don't is just because, and they don't even know that they're locally paid versus state paid usually, or they just get a paycheck. So that's additional information I'd like somewhere. So.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, let's talk Rowan-Cabarrus Community College.
I'm sorry, the other thing I was going to mention, I apologize.
I'm sorry, it's okay.
252, just in the text, I believe. Kannapolis City Schools pulled out in grounds maintenance. Aren't they doing that themselves instead of running that?
They're doing the mowing portion, I believe.
The mowing portion?
They took a mowing portion of their contract out.
So I didn't know, this says overall grounds maintenance, something in there about how they provide it, and I don't know if in this paragraph, if you want to add something in there that Kannapolis is responsible for their grounds maintenance.
And we can get all those adjustments made.
Yeah.
Alrighty, let's talk through Rowan-Cabarrus Community College. It's in your budget book on page 258. And the current expense for them has increased $75,000 to $2,007,829, and that relates to increased rent until they can move out of that cosmetology facility. Their capital reduced $113,000 back to the normal norm of $100,000, and the debt service for them declined $660. So that makes the change for them $38,660 less, and their total $2,337,738. There's also a little bit of funding in the contingency for them, around $6,000, depending on what the governor's budget does that relates to their funding. And there will be a full presentation this evening by each school system and Thursday evening by Rowan-Cabarrus Community College. Outside agencies. This is on pages 265 in your book and 228 in your book. The Arts Council is proposed to remain the same at $26,000. The Economic Development Corporation is proposed to remain the same at $332,000. The fire district's sales tax, which is kind of a pass-through for us, will increase the same 3% that we increased the sales tax budget. The Cabarrus Health Alliance will decline $243,000, which was the net of the $300,000 one time plus the $56,000 they did get to fund the school nurse supervisor. The Forest Service declined $14,000. That relates to the fiscal 14 number, included us paying 40% of their truck, and that was a one-time thing, so it's not included in the 15 budget. The Cardinal Innovations is proposed to remain the same at $614,000. The JCPC is proposed to be the $295,111. During this, I think that's what we started with for this year, but they did have some money get reverted to the state, and we got some more money, and that may happen again next year, but we'll start with the $295,111, but that's why there is a decrease from our current revised budget of $52,000. And the Special Olympics is proposed at $55,930. So all in all, that results in a decrease of $292,123, or 3.63%. Any questions on that? All righty. I think Jonathan's going to tell you about the capital improvement plan.
So again, just to provide some background and repeat something we've said, of course, the specific pages where each of these capital improvement program projects are listed and in more detail is on the, of course, the right side of this graph. But in addition, capital improvement program projects are ones that are 100,000 or greater, so those larger projects that we plan at least 5 years in advance. We may occasionally have some that come into the schedule a little sooner or sometime during that 5 year because something's come up, but for the most part, these are ones that are planned, and many times you'll see they're shown for future years beyond the 5 years. These first group of projects are ones that are in the budget for this year. Of course, we already talked about the 2 school systems and the amount of money that goes to them for capital projects. That's that $1,020,000 for Cabarrus schools and $100,000 for Kannapolis City Schools. The $1.5 million, although it says cosmetology, of course, that's other programs, but that's money that you've indicated to Rowan-Cabarrus that you would be funding. So that's actually a June agenda item to be discussed further. The building maintenance, the governmental center chiller has actually moved up a little bit on the schedule because of ongoing maintenance issues with it and the need to replace that. The public safety radio replacement, of course, is a move towards those digital radios to replace radios that are 10 to 15 years old and are no longer being able to be upgraded. That is a larger amount than we initially anticipated, but we'll be doing that over a 3-year process, so that you'll see that amount in this year and the next 2 years to completely replace radios. Soil and water conservation, you'll note that the funding source for that is the present value fund. Properties that are in the present use value program, if they leave that program, so they're sold and they no longer used for farming or forestry or something that qualifies, they are responsible for paying 3 years of back taxes, that difference in taxes between present use value and highest and best use value. That money, by policy of the Board of Commissioners, goes into a present use value fund, and the idea then was that money would be used for programs that helped preserve open space, farmland, pasture land, or land in which we have forestry taking place. So because those two are tied together, soil and water conservation, that amount of money for that prime farmland soil comes out of that present use value fund rather than the general fund. Other than that, we've discussed the other projects, so the other ones are of course related to the school systems that we discussed previously. These are new projects on the list, and then it shows the fiscal year that they would come into place. One of the ones I want to highlight, the front counter and public meeting room for tax collections, that is both a functional and safety issue that we would add, as we have in some of our courts and some of our other offices, where we would actually reconstruct that counter to allow a greater safety, including panic buttons and other issues because of the amount of money that's handled in that particular office. We've already talked about some minor or some smaller renovations or some smaller maintenance issues that we've had to do at the firing range, but long term we need to do some major renovations. That shows in the 2018-19 fiscal year. The other one that I want to highlight is emergency medical services. Currently, when you go to their Station 1, their administrative offices are also located there. It's getting extremely crowded for them to be located in the same office. They really need a headquarters base at some point in the future. It would also allow us to do more central supply, and rather than continue to build new stations, it would allow some roving units that could then be supplied out of a central supply, but could be assigned to different areas based on volume changes, rather than having to have a fixed station for those. One of the options that we've been looking at is the office building that we own on Lake Concord Road that used to house the parks offices and currently has Guardian ad litem there. We'll be moving Guardian ad litem offices into the renovated courthouse, the backside of the courthouse annex, so that building will be vacant. So you'll have the opportunity to consider whether you want to sell that building or put it on the market to sell, or whether that would be a possibility to use for emergency medical services for their headquarters base. Of course, we have another co-location we'll be doing with Harrisburg Fire Station number 3, which is highlighted here. the soil and water conservation, you're going to see a number of those that show up on the new projects as we page through these. And these come from their natural heritage inventory. It's a study they had done. It was presented to the commissioners. They set the priority on those, so those come to us, but those would be ones that also would have to come from the present use value fund, and there are not funds enough in there to cover all those. So every year we reanalyze these projects. We come back and look at our capital improvement program to see if there's anything that needs to be added, anything that needs to be pushed back, anything that needs to be eliminated. When you get to the end here with the parks, the one that's been identified for future years, which means it's more than 5 years out, is a renovation of the mini golf. That part of that is related to an ongoing analysis of our American Disability Act compliance. We've looked at the need to make part of that ADA compliant, and we do make progress in all of our parks. Anytime that we do renovations, we do make progress on our ADA plan. So that would be something that would be one of the larger projects, and that's why it's identified. And then restroom facility for Rowan-Cabarrus Park. And then finally, if you're aware, at the Arena and Event Center, when you're in the fixed seating, there is no aisle safety lighting, and so we project sometime in the future we really need to add that aisle safety lighting for those steps. So projects that were not funded in fiscal year 15, the ones we analyzed were pushed back at least 1 year from their previous start date. The capital improvement projects that are included, the total is $3.682 million. As you saw, a lot of that is the capital money that we transfer to the schools.
All right. Any questions before we start the 5-year plan? We have a larger printout of the 5-year plan there, and then I believe it will also be on the screen. Keep the plan on the screen. Okay.
And do you know what page it is in their notebooks?
Yes, it's page 118. At the time that we originally did this, we weren't sure about Kannapolis and the bond, so there were 2 plans included in what you got, but this is the latter of those 2 plans. Okay, with the 5-year plan, the first item on it for fiscal 15 is the $3,167,000, which is the growth in the tax base. And there again, that's the gross current year amounts. And that was based on a growth rate of 1.97%. For fiscal 16, Mr. Wiesner has recommended we project 1.5%. For fiscal 17, 1.75%, and after that, it's 2%. This does, you will notice in the reval year, you see the change back to get it back to revenue neutral. So this plan does assume that we go revenue neutral in 2017 with a tax rate of 0.678. The sales taxes, we will continue to use 3%. In the growth in sales taxes year over year. The next item is the ambulance fees, which are increasing 1.31% in fiscal 15 and 1% each year thereafter. With the Affordable Care Act, I was just a little concerned about going up a whole lot on what we'll be receiving for those services. The next item is the building inspection fees, which increased $125,000 this year, which is 6.1%. We used 4.5% for each year thereafter. For the Register of Deeds, we projected an increase of $69,300, which was 3.96%, and then we used 4% for the remaining years, 16 through 19. In the revenues, you'll see a decrease of $844,000 in fiscal 15. That's where the other side of those delinquent taxes is largely. That's $540,000 of that number. There's also a reduction in human service revenues, reduction in election revenues, increase in SRO funds, and increase in the Medicaid hold harmless. So when all's said and done, the wash was $844 reduction in revenues. Now the next section is important. It's the one-time revenue sources. And if you'll notice, the one-time revenue sources in fiscal 14 were $10,060,000. In 2015, it's only $2.2 million. So that's a reduction of $7,860,000. And that's what I mentioned earlier in the lottery funds and in the COPS funds and then the DMV funds. So when you take those three hits, that's $7.8 million that we had in 14 that we will not have in these future years. So that's a significant change. All right, let's look at the expense side. First, let's talk about the county services. We've talked about the personnel change. That's the first item in 15, and then you'll notice $87,000 is the amount in 16. What that is the anticipated annualizing of those positions that were not a full year in fiscal 15. The next one is the increase in the health insurance. 234 relates to the Affordable Care Act in this year, but in the future years what we've done is we've estimated a 7% increase in the medical care cost. We all know that the inflation rate for medical care is higher than regular inflation. Then below there, you'll see in fiscal year 15 only, the $100,000 for salary study adjustments. I believe that will be discussed at the June 2nd meeting. There's $115,000 in that column for merits not yet in there, because when we projected the budget, we didn't, obviously, we do that in March, and so we don't have April, May's, and June's merits. And so that is an estimated amount of what those merits may be. The item below that is the $300,000 for the workers' comp we have mentioned in trying to have this become part of our normal payroll process. And then if you'll notice in fiscal 16, it adds another $460. So that will build what we expect to be our normal cost into the budget. And of course, we'll be monitoring that as we move along to make sure that that is adequate but not excessive. The next item is an increase in merits for county employees. It begins in fiscal 16 with the $715,463 amount. And the next line relates to the other items, other operations that weren't captured anywhere else. That's kind of a catch-all. And for the current year, that's a reduction of $2,672,000 in expenses. It's much less in the future years. So that's the county services section. Then the debt section, we've got the normal reduction in debt of the 262 and the 786 that you'll see. And then if you'll look in fiscal 16, you see $1,330,000 being added. That's been there for years. It's the first principal payment on the Q-scabs. And of course, that once it gets built into that middle section, it's in there to go forward. The next item is the debt service for the Kannapolis Middle School, $5,353,750, and that assumes that we fund $23 million over 5 years. Then the next item is the debt service for the Royal Oaks and the Rowan-Cabarrus Community College of the $20 million. That's $5,772,000, and that's assuming that it's financed over 4 years. I'm going to have a slide in here in a minute that shows you all the debt that relates to the schools, all the cost of opening the schools, all the one-time costs, because these are all significant, and I know it's hard to follow in this. And Okay, you go to the slide on the debt related. Go to this one. This is slide 50. No, keep going. There, that slide. Okay, because I realize this is hard to wrap your mind around. There's so much going on. And so we've kind of divided it into those three areas. The debt service to fund the capital needs of getting the schools built. The ongoing cost of opening those schools, which will be recurring costs. And then the one-time cost, things like architect and engineering fees, and if we promise them a set amount of money upon opening. So this first slide deals with the debt service related to the new educational facilities. And you'll notice we divided it by fiscal year down the left side and by which facility it is going across the top. So the first column is Rowan-Cabarrus with their $9 million in funding. The second column is Cabarrus County Schools with the $11 million for Royal Oaks, and the Kannapolis City with $23 million for their middle school. And that's the one that kicks in first in fiscal 16 with the $5,353,000. So, and then the last column is kind of telling you the total by fiscal year of what's getting added into our base cost. So after in fiscal 16, we're adding $5,353,000. Then in fiscal 17, we add the financing of the $20 million, which is about 2.6 for RCC and 3.2 for Cabarrus, and then the payment, the second year payment on Kannapolis. So that's $10,917,000. We'll be adding the second year to the base. The third year is fiscal 18. Will be in our second year of our payments on the $20 million. Our third year in payments on the Kannapolis City, and the payments will be $10,479,000. And then in fiscal 19, it'll be the fourth year for the Rowan-Cabarrus and the Cabarrus County, and the third year, excuse me, and then the fourth year for the Kannapolis Middle, and that'll be $10,041,000. So as you can see, the amount of the debt service is substantial. But those are the figures. The next slide, we're going to talk about the recurring cost. Okay, and so there again, I've got the fiscal year down the left side and the facility from the right, and then there again, I'm getting some totals by fiscal year. So the first thing to open will be the cosmetology, which is $315,000 in fiscal 16. The Northwest Elementary of $1,200,000 for Cabarrus County Schools. And remember, whenever we give funds to one school system, we have to give the other side their fair share. So we've called that in this the ADM split. So when we gave $1,200,000 for Northwest Elementary, Kannapolis will get $163,636. So that made the total of $1,363,636 that you see on the 5-year plan. So the total for that year is $1,678,000. The next year, the Advanced Technology Center will open at an estimated cost of $500,000 in recurring cost. And then that year, when the Kannapolis Middle opens, to give them $875,000, we have to give Cabarrus County $6,619,000. So that made the total to open it $7,994,125. So now built in the base for fiscal 17 is $9,672,000. In fiscal 18, we've got the Mount Pleasant Middle and the Royal Oaks Elementary opening on the Cabarrus side, and they need $1,600,000 to open that school. And then the Kannapolis side of that is $211,508 for a total of $1,811,508. So by the end of the plan, at the end of 18, we've built into our base cost of recurring cost $11,484,269.
Now, can you go back? So part of the reason for those, some, not all, but some of the increase is that the different facilities are coming online in different years.
Yes, ma'am.
So if they all came online in the same year, then that ADM split amount wouldn't be as,
You'd save
As much.
$1,811,508 if they opened the same year.
and that's recurring cost.
Yes, ma'am. Well, yes.
That's what that's showing is operating costs, which are,
Well, if you do it all in the same year, one offsets the other, and so that's why you save the $1,811,000, yeah, and it would be ongoing from then. Any other questions on that one? Okay, then the last column, last slide, it talks about the one-time costs. And as we've learned through this process of talking with the LGC, we've got to have funding for the architect and engineerings before we can issue bonds and get started. So in fiscal 16, you'll notice on the plan, $1,060,000 for the A&E costs for the Rowan-Cabarrus Community College building. Then in fiscal 17 is the $2 million that was added, promised to them for the Advanced Technology Center. And then there's $500,000 for new buses for the Kannapolis Middle School. And then in fiscal 18, there would need to be the $2 million that was also promised to Mount Pleasant Middle to complete their project. So that's another $5,560,000. There you go. Okay, so it's a lot to take in.
okay, I'm sorry to ask you to
Okay,
go back again.
Where do you want us to go to?
Where you were,
Okay,
I guess where you were.
the one time,
Well, go back one before that,
that one.
or go back one before that. Okay, so in order to do the Kannapolis Middle School, do you have factored in somewhere cash to pay for architects?
It's a June agenda item. I just finished it today to request a possible way of funding that architectural fees. Because it's not included in all this. But yes, it's been on the June agenda.
Okay, because you had, on the next one, I guess it was, you had money in there for Rowan-Cabarrus, or the next one, one more. There you have architect engineering for Rowan-Cabarrus, but I didn't see architect and engineering for Kannapolis. Same with, that would be the only one, I guess.
Royal Oaks is also missing, but that was proposed for Cabarrus to put that up front, and we would reimburse them at financing. Depending on what the circumstances were at that point in time.
Right. And in fiscal year 17, the extra $2 million, going back to my comment at our last meeting, that's because there's 11, 9, I'm going to get my numbers mixed up, I'm sorry.
9.
The amount, 9 for Rowan-Cabarrus, where the idea was to put 9 in a bond, but still need $2 million more in cash. So, right?
9 in a bond, 2 million more, which gets them to 11 million.
So if that $2 million was, if the bond amount was increased, that would take away that cash amount that would be needed, which would free up some money to do everything else that you showed in the last slide. And same thing with Mount Pleasant, with not having enough funds there. I don't know which one I want to look at. I'm sorry. I'm looking back and forth. That's the way I read it. So, okay, thank you.
Okay, back to the 5-year plan. We're through with the debt section, and now I'm going to start back under the other column, where we've got the economic incentives, and those are estimated to increase 279 in fiscal 15, and then decrease 896 in 16, decrease an additional $1,000,004 in 17, increase 74,000 in 18, and decrease 2,000 in 19. So those are fairly volatile. They're totally dependent on when these various grantees complete the requirements for their grant and submit their applications for us to fund it.
And I see in 2014 that increased 1,151,000, and next year it'll be 279,000. So those two alone are at 1.4 million. Do you know what the total that we pay is in incentive grants right now? Or do you know what the total will be in 2015 that we'll pay in incentive grants?
I can get that. It's 3230.
And if you want to move on, I'll find it for him.
Okay, because it's in there in cost center 3230, I believe. All right. The next item relates to the TIF payment, and we are capped at 50% of the debt on that, so that's just based on their amortization schedule there, and it is increasing $43,700 in 15, and then the amounts in the future years changing are fairly negligible. Then we've got the increase to the schools of the 1%, which we've discussed. The other increases related to the debt, which we've discussed. We've discussed the change to the contribution to the Health Alliance. We mentioned it, but I'll mention it again, the decrease in the contribution to the Arena Fund of $56,279. The next item is the change in the contingency. And the contingency has reduced $557,000 from the original adopted budget last year. And at the time this was run, it was a decrease of $477,903. What is included in the contingency? The contingency totals $721,000. What's in there is your normal board contingency of around $400,000, and then $315,000 in there for these school raises. They're kind of in two tiers. One is to get teachers up to the $33,000. From anything less than 33 to 33, and then there's a group of funding for the 1% on the locally funded. And then there's around $6,000 in there for the Rowan-Cabarrus increases, depending on what the governor does. So it's $721,314, and the adopted amount last year was $1,278,428. So that's that section. All right, now let's talk about the one-time amounts on the expense side. And what you'll see is the $1,220,000 all 5 years is what kind of the norm is for the schools and the community college. And then we've got some funds for capital projects. And the first year is $837,000, which, as Jonathan mentioned, is the $165,000 for the chiller, and year one of the sheriff radios at $672,000. And then year two has got the $2 million for the Rowan-Cabarrus Community College, $500,000 for buses, year two of the sheriff radios at $672,000. And then the $1,060,000 for architect and engineering for Rowan-Cabarrus Community College. And then in fiscal 17, we've got the year three on the sheriff radios, and then we'll be done with those. And then in fiscal 19, you're seeing $100,000 for the HVAC unit for the Human Services Building. And you will notice on the 5-year plan that we're showing overall that we would require for this to balance $6.2 million in additional cuts in fiscal 16 and $4.2 million in fiscal 17 due to projected increases for the debt service and the operational cost of the new educational facilities. That's a mouthful. Are there any questions? Anything you want us to research?
The incentive grants that Mr. Ostrike asked about are on page 226 in your budget book if you're interested in seeing that detail.
Yep, they total $2,777,000 in the proposed budget.
What's the net to the county, though? I mean, there's a net because it's an 85% incentive grant, so there's a net plus of 15% during the
Right.
terms of their,
Right.
so if you don't have to figure it out right now, but at some point, I think we need to acknowledge, yes, there are incentive grants that are being honored, but they're only being honored because they've paid their taxes in originally.
Right.
And then they get rebated back on the taxes. It's not like that money's coming out of somebody else's pocket. It's coming out of the same money that they're paying in.
Right. My understanding is they have to make the investment and pay the taxes in order to receive the incentives.
And we've had some that have not followed through on it because they didn't want to reveal information that was required for them to reveal to us. So it was awarded to them, and then they've come back around and said, thanks, but
No thanks.
no thanks.
Thank you so much for your time and attention.
So, are we ready to take a break then, Mike? Okay. Let's take a 15-minute break. We'll be ready to start back at 6 o'clock. That work for everybody? Yes? Somebody say yes. Okay, thank you.